Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar, Tracking Changes in Core. My name is Eva Dace and I will be your host during today's webinar, which is being presented by Bethany Maddox. Bethany serves Vitek's customers primarily at the support desk as the customer care specialist. Between support cases, she manages the overall vision of customer care at Vitek, developing instructional screencasts on various core and Genesis topics and elements of software documentation. She's often served as host, writer, and technical manager of countless webinars throughout her tenure at Vitek. Now, before I let her take the stage, I'd like to review a few technical details. First, questions. We're going to do questions a little differently today. Please send your questions in as soon as you think of them, as Bethany will pause at the end of some sections to take a few minutes to answer questions on that particular topic. We will also be holding a comprehensive Q&A session at the end of the presentation. As usual, submit your questions using your webinar control panel. Next, recording. The webinar is being recorded today. If you're having technical difficulties during the presentation, an online archive of this presentation will be available within 24 hours of the live version. I'm going to chat out the link to you now so you can have it ready for future reference. There you go. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Bethany. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Eva. I'm excited to be here talking about many ways that Core tracks changes. Let's take a quick look at the agenda. We're going to talk about versioning and a few different aspects of it. We'll get into baselines. We will talk about project comparison, the audit log, the notification center, and then we'll wrap up with some best practices. So I know you didn't come here to see PowerPoint in action. You came to see Core. So let me get out of PowerPoint and show you Core, and we'll get started. Okay. First, we need to know how to enable versioning and what the default settings are. When creating a new project in Core, versioning is enabled by default. Let's create a new project. Here you see the enable versioning attribute is set to true. To disable versioning when you create the project, just drop it down, set it to false, and then we'll go ahead and click OK and create this project. So it's really that simple to set the attribute for versioning when you create the project. After the project has been created, you can enable or disable versioning using the administrative tools. I'll click on Tools, Administrative Tools. Then I can select my project, right-click on the project, go to the Manage menu. We're going to get pretty friendly with this Manage menu here today and show you a lot of the things that are here. And right now, we can take a look at the versioning options, and here you'll see the inverse of your current setting. So versioning is currently disabled, so here we have the option to enable it. And I can just say yes, and now we have versioning enabled. So now that we know how to set it and adjust the setting, if we wanted to change this versioning, let's take another look at a simple way to find out what the setting is. Here we are looking at the project property sheet. It will show you the information for whatever project you have selected in Administrative Tools. Notice in the lower right portion we have an attribute for enable versioning. It is set to true. You can also find this in the Project Explorer. So I'm going to close Administrative Tools, then click on Properties. And down here we have the same enable versioning attribute, also set to true. Now there are some circumstances for default settings, and I want to take a moment to detail those. When I import projects from Core 5 or earlier, those are versions of Core that didn't have this versioning capability. Versioning will be disabled by default because that data didn't have any versioning information in it. So if I just import an old, say, Core 5 data file, versioning will be turned off. Now if I have an existing project open in Core right now, and I import data, regardless of the versioning setting in that import file, Core is going to stay with the setting in my current project that I'm importing into. We assume you want to keep what you have open. Now, if you aren't sure what your setting is, remember you can always go to Administrative Tools to view and change the current settings. So now that we know how to turn it on and off, let's see how it works. A version browser is accessible through the element property sheets that will allow you to see the history of your changes at the attribute level. In the Project Explorer window, when you select a class, you'll notice that some of the attributes in the property sheet are preceded by an icon. These are the individual attributes that have versioning enabled. Versioning is not enabled on all classes or on all attributes by default. You can see here in the component class we have the number and description enabled, but none of the other attributes on the main tab are enabled. The classes that have some attributes enabled for versioning by default are the components, functions, interfaces, items, links, requirements, and verification requirements. All other classes have nothing versioned by default. We'll talk a little bit later about how to add or remove versioning from an attribute of any class. Now, the first time you enter information into a field, you are creating the baseline version. And before we go any further, let me switch over to a different project that has some versioning information and some other data. So here we're looking at our geospatial library. Now, this description attribute is versioned, and any changes I make to this field will create new versions, and the versioning icon will change, letting me know that I have multiple versions available. Let's just enter a little text here. I'll just put the word change, and you can see that this icon has enabled. When I click it, it opens the versioning browser. Here you'll see double windows, a set on the left, a set on the right. There's a list of versions. These two are identical lists. The version at the bottom of list, whether you have 2 in the list or 10 in the list, the version at the bottom will always be your baseline. The version at the top will always be your current version. Notice that the versioning browser identifies the user who made the entry, as well as a time and date stamp. By selecting different dates on each side of the window, I can make comparisons of the data and quickly call out what had changed. You can restore a value by clicking on the one you want to restore. Oops, that's the one I want to restore. And then click the Restore button at the bottom of the versioning browser. When you restore a version, the date remains the date it was entered, not the date of restoration. So you'll notice that state on the new version still says 5/18. Whether you have 2 or 10 versions, the versioning browser is the place to get the details for each of the versions. The browser is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the power of versioning. If you would like to review the version history of a group of entities, an attribute history report can be run using a script. I'll select the Run Script icon. Then, using the drop-down boxes, I'm going to select the versioning folder. And then finally, the attribute history report, which was the first one in the list. So I'll click OK. Now we have a dialog box that's asking me to make some choices. First, I'll choose a class to report on. So we have the component class. This is what I selected the last time I ran the report, and Core is showing that to me. If I wanted to add some, I could just double click or use the add and add all buttons. And then we also want to select the attributes. I have added all. When asked if you would like to show interim versions down here, select yes if you would like the report to contain all versions. Select no if you only want the baseline in the current version. For this webinar, I'm going to leave the default selection of yes. And then you also want to enter the starting date after which you want to display changes. This script will ignore all previous versions prior to this date, producing a report that contains versions created on that date and later. If you want the output to go back to the date the project was created, just leave the threshold at the default value. Finally, I'm asked to select elements. And here on the left side, it's showing me all elements in the class I selected. I had previously selected Add All using the Add All button. So I'll click OK. Now I'm going to see a Save File dialog. and it's asking me to select the location and to confirm my name. Notice we named it something for you that's going to give you some info about the project, the report you're running, and the date you ran it. I'm happy with the default, so I'll click Save. And there we go. Let's take a look. The script ran and opened up the output for me. Now the classes are separated into individual tables. If my project had had changes in multiple classes, we'd see multiple tables here. My project just had a couple changes to one component, so that's what we're seeing. And each element is going to have its own heading. So underneath this, we could have 5 or 6 elements of the component class. We just happen to only have one in this project. So in this example, we see the component class at the top of the table. Below the element heading, there's a list of the version history by attribute. So we have descriptions. If I had numbers or purpose, we might have those listed down below. Notice the element headings. The left-hand column contains the attributes that have multiple versions, and the fields to the right contains details of those versions. You'll also notice that the report indicates which versions are the baseline and which versions are the current versions. All values in between them, in this case this middle row here, are your interim versions. Now from time to time you may want to purge the interim versions to prepare for a project review maybe. When you do this, you would be purging all versions between your baseline and your current version. This should be a calculated decision as part of your project management plan. Now there's 2 methods to purge versions. The first method is quick and it's a very broad brush. It purges the version history of all attributes of the project and all elements. To do this, at the top of the Project Explorer, I'll choose Project, Manage, then Purge Versions. In the dialog box, I'm asked to confirm. If I choose no, it'll just close and nothing happens. I'll click yes to purge all interim versions, and it gives me a little dialog, and when it's done, it will alert me. This is a very broad purge, and this should be used with care. You cannot undo this purge. So please make sure it's a calculated decision when you purge versions. Now, if you want to be more specific, you can purge versions in a whole facility or a class or just one element or even one attribute of one element. So we can be as broad or as narrow as we want to be. And to do that, we do it by a script. So let's open up the script icon again. I'm still in my versioning folder. And then I'm going to select Purge Attribute History and click OK. So Core is going to ask us for what class. So we'll just go ahead and do components. And then I can also select the attributes. We still have them all selected, so we'll click OK. And I can select any elements that I want. I can do as few as 1 or as many as all. Right now I have selected just 3 elements to purge. So I'll click OK and confirm one more time. And it lets me know that it's done. So as I mentioned earlier, versioning is only enabled by default on elements in specific classes. Also, only a limited set of attributes have versioning enabled. At times, you may find that you wish to adjust the versioning settings. This can be done in schema mode. To get there, from the Project Explorer, I click Project and then Shift to schema mode. A dialog box will appear that warns you that schema changes will affect the data in the database, and you'll be asked if you want to export. I strongly recommend that you export before making any changes to your schema, but for the sake of this webinar, I'm going to take the quick route and say no. Now, to change the versioning setting of a specific attribute, I'm going to go to the classes, and then we're going to select a class. Let's take a look at components. And the purpose attribute is not currently versioned. Let's turn that on. So I come down here to the attribute list, select the one that I want to change, right-click, and then I'm going to bring up the properties. And here we see all the properties of that attribute. To enable it, I simply put a check mark next to the versioned attribute, and it's done. Now notice that the last modified timestamp did change. Now that I've finished, I'll click OK. Now that's how I do this for just one specific attribute of one specific class. Let's say I wanted to enable versioning on all attributes of an entire class. To do that, I just right-click on the class that I'd like to change. I'm going to choose category. So let's right-click, and then we have an enable versioning option. You'll be prompted to decide if you wish to enable versioning for all attributes of the class and subclasses. Now notice that some classes here have subclasses. For instance, category is a subclass of something else. If you select no, of course nothing happens. The dialog just closes. I'll select yes in order to enable versioning. Now I'm going to switch back over to database mode now that I'm finished making changes. So I'll click Project, Shift to Database Mode. Now let's take a look at the category class that we just changed. Notice there is now a versioning icon in front of the attributes. There's just a few here that can have it enabled on this main sheet, and they're both enabled. Okay, Eva, we've already been through a bit of information. Let's pause for a moment and take any questions. Do you have any for me?
Hey, Bethany, I've got one for you here. Let's see. It is from Stan, and he asks, if the attribute history report doesn't show new elements, then how do I see that?
Okay. Good catch. The attribute history report is just showing changes to existing elements. And Stan caught that, well, what if I want to see new elements? And we do have another report that does that, and that's actually done through comparing two projects. And that's something that we have on the agenda for a little bit later today. So I'm going to defer completely answering Stan's question until I've gotten to that segment. And then Stan, if you have a follow-up, please do let me know.
All right, that sounds good. That's it for this section.
Okay, let's move on then and talk about baselining. Now, baselines allow you to purge the version history, essentially setting a new starting point. Now, project teams often choose to baseline their model at specific stages in the project, particularly after any kind of review is done. There's two ways to establish a baseline for your project, and so let's take a moment to explain each one. The first method to baseline a project is very simple and baselines the entire project. Again, this is just a huge broad brush. It will remove all previous versions on all elements in all classes, leaving only everything that's current. In the Project Explorer, click Project, Manage, then Baseline Versions. A dialog box appears. And this dialog gives me the opportunity to comment on the baseline. You may wish to enter a reason for baselining, and I'll enter something really quick here. Now, Core does provide the timestamp automatically for you, and the text will be appended to the description field on the project's property sheet. I'll show you where that goes in just a moment. To complete the baseline, I'll just click Yes. The dialog box will close, and then the baseline's complete. Now, if you view the property sheet of an element that had previous versions, such as this physical context element, you'll notice that the versioning icon is now disabled. It's grayed out, indicating that the current version is the only one that exists. So we've wiped out everything but current here. Now let's view the comment we entered. In the project pane, I'm going to click on Properties and view the property sheet for my entire project. In the description field, you'll see both the text that I entered and the timestamp. Now, whether you're working in a local or a server database, I suggest exporting an XML file after you generate a baseline. A collection of these baselines can be helpful in the event you need to examine the evolution of your project at a later date. If you would like to baseline with a different level of detail, we have a script available for that, much like we did for purging attribute versions. And this will allow you to baseline attributes for an element, a facility, an entire project. It can be as narrow or as broad as you like. So this script retains, again, only the latest version. So for the example, I'm going to baseline all attributes in all elements of the requirements class. So let's show you how you do that. In the Project Explorer, I'm going to click the Run Script icon again. We're still in the versioning folder. Then I'm going to select the baseline elements script. That familiar dialog box appears. The last time I ran this, I did run it on the requirement class, and so that's already selected for me. And the attributes are also selected for me. I can select or deselect anything I want. Let's take a couple off just for fun, then click OK. Now I'm asked to select which elements I'd like to use. I can do as few or as many as I like. In this demonstration, I'm doing the whole requirements class, so just to confirm I have them all, I'll click that Add All button, and then I'll click OK. There's one final confirmation. I'll click Yes, and it's done. So creating baselines is really that easy. To do it broad or narrow, any way that you like. Now remember that a collection of baselines is a good history to keep for your project. So I suggest exporting before and after each baseline. I'm basically pretty crazy when it comes to protecting your data, having multiple versions of your data to show your history, and I'm a big fan of backups. So back up often. All right, so let's talk about project comparison, and this is what I was mentioning when I was answering Stan's question. Since you're creating all those backup XML files, I'm going to show you a neat trick that you can do with them. The project compare report allows you to compare any two projects and will output a detailed report of the changes. I have two projects I've set up for this demonstration, and it represents two different versions of a baseline. The first thing I need to do is import each. I need both projects in the same repository next to each other in order to run this report. So first I'm going to import, and I'm going to get my August file. This is my first baseline. And when I import it, I'm just going to add something to the name here to let me know that this is the file from August. And we'll run a quick import. Now I'm going to do the same with the December file. So there's December. I'm going to be really careful to make sure I get this in a new project, and again name it so I can tell the difference between my two versions. There we go. Now I'm going to open my December project. You want to have your latest version of the project open when you run this report. So I'll click the Run Script icon. Then I'll switch over to the Project Compare folder. And then I'll select the Project Compare report, which is the only one in this folder. First, I'll be prompted to select my base project, which one I want to compare my current project to. So that would be the August project. I have that selected. I'll click OK. Next, I can select a facility. I'll choose Systems Engineering and click OK. Now we have a few choices. First, I can examine my data by element ID or by element name. It's important to note that every element in your database has a unique ID that is created when you create the element. This ID never changes. So if you change the element name, you still have the same ID. For this reason, I suggest running this report by the ID. The next option is to compare the description attribute only. This is a quick method to narrow down the report to its most commonly used option. For this demonstration, I'll leave that set to no. I want it to compare all attributes. Finally, Exactly like the attribute history report, I can narrow down the results by specifying a date after which I'm interested in changes. Since I want to see all changes, I'll leave the default date. Now I'll click OK and be prompted to designate the name and location to save the output file. Notice we named the file for you with some key information about the contents, and I'll save it to my desktop. And here it is. The title page is a complete description, a clear description of the contents. Here on the table of contents, I can populate this by using Control-A on my keyboard to select the entire document. Then I'll click F9 on my keyboard to update the contents. Here, we see that the results are sorted by class. Components, functions, and states are all the changes that I have. They're also sorted by changed elements and then by added or new elements. That's what Stan was looking for there. Now, as I page down, I'll see a section that tells me about the classes that were omitted from my report. These are classes that have elements but are not part of the facility that I chose. I chose systems engineering, and these are not part of that systems engineering facility. Now, paging down further, I see the component class. I have quick counts here of elements that were changed, that were added, and that were deleted. I really like being able to see the deleted element information here as well. Notice that my changes are shown side by side. Much like in the versioning browser, this allows me to quickly note the exact nature of the change. I love this report because it's where I can get a good picture of the various types of changes, well arranged and easy to examine. Eva, we'll pause for just another moment. Do you have any more questions for me?
I sure don't, not for this section.
Okay, let's move right along. Close this report. And let's talk about audit logs. I'm going to get back to our geospatial library here. Now, audit logs are a simple text-based log of all changes to an element. Let's take a look at one. Sorry, clicked the wrong place there. Here we go. You'll find it on the secondary tab of all property sheets of an element. Here you'll see the time and date of a change, who made the change, and the basic nature of the change. You won't see in-depth details here. If you're looking for that level of detail, you would want to refer to the version browser instead. Now note that purging versions and creating baselines does not remove this data. In fact, it writes information to this data. You can clear this information if you desire. In fact, you can choose not to maintain it at all. Much like we did with versioning, let's go back to the beginning and look at the settings when you create a new project. So here I am on the project creation page, and you have the option to enable or disable audit logging. The default is always true. Of course, you can just change it with the drop-down. Much like versioning, we found that we like to turn it off at first and then turn it back on once the rapid change cycle that is the first stages of the project has passed. We'll go ahead and skip creating a new project since we have one open, but let's take a look at how to change the setting after a project was created. This is done back in Administrative Tools. So I'll click Tools, then Administrative Tools. I just select my project, right-click, go to this Manage menu that we're getting to know, and then we have options for disabling audit logging. I'm not entirely certain why that is not available for me on this project. Let me look at another one and see why it's not there. There we go. So there's where I can turn it off and disable or enable audit logs. Now, if I do this, I'm going to get a warning. It's letting me know that all of my existing audit logs will be cleared. I'll click yes, and it's done. Here we go. Audit logging is either entirely on or entirely off. It tracks everything or it tracks nothing. Now this is different than versioning, where you can be really specific and tell it what you want it to track. Audit loggings are not that at all. It's all or nothing. Now audit logs do have some limitation to the amount of data that you can keep there. It is limited to 30 kilobytes per attribute. When an audit log exceeds that size, it gets automatically trimmed down to 16 kilobytes. This will help you maintain visibility into the change history of your element while balancing database growth. And this is particularly helpful for those project teams that use automated scripts that frequently revise or rebuild database content. Now there are options to clean out the logs, as I said before, and I can clear on a whole project, a package, a class, a folder, an element. To clear the logs, for the whole project, I can do this from the project menu. Just click Project, Manage, Clear Audit Logs. It asks me to confirm, and I click Yes. To clear on any other level, I can just select what I want to clear. So let's say I want to do the document class. Oops. I just select the document class, right-click on it, Manage, and I can clear just that class for the audit log. Now it looks like I have it disabled, which is why I can't clear right now. Now note that clearing on any other than the project level will actually make an entry in the audit log. And you'll find a name there in the audit log that we saw before that is a note about it with a timestamp and a username. Now as your project team grows larger and your model scales up in size and complexity, staying abreast of the latest changes can be challenging. While the techniques we've already discussed today are great tools, we have one more option for you. The Notification Center borrows elements of social media, allowing you to follow an object of interest. You can access the Notification Center from the project pane. Here you'll see a list of objects I'm following on the right. I can follow just about anything, an element, a class, a folder, or a package. To follow something, we just need to access the Manage options from the right-click menu. So let's follow the interface class. Okay, I just right-click on it, Manage, and Follow. I go back to the Notification Center. I'll see that it's now there. Now I'll get an alert here each time another user makes a change to something that I'm following. So right now I'm logged in as administrator. I'm going to log out and create some changes. So we have another user here that's going to log in. And I happen to know that the other user is following the interface in the requirement class. So let's add an interface and maybe make a change to another one. And how about a relationship? So we made a few changes here, did those really quickly, logged in as B. Maddox. I'm going to log back out and see what the administrator sees about the changes that it's following. And here we go. In the middle pane, you see samples of those notifications. I can see who made what change. It was changed by B. Maddox, and when, along with a concise description of the change. Also, it shows me the element name as well. If I want to know more, I can access any element from here. Just double-click on it, and it will open the element property sheet, and then I can use this information that it added an interface to the includes. And I can just take a look at that, reference it, make sure that I'm happy with it. Now this does open in a new window, and it allows me to keep my place in the Notification Center. When I'm done looking at the element, I can just close that and I get right back to my alerts. Notice that the alert I opened is still there. Alerts will stay in this list until I dismiss them. Options are available in the right-click menu to dismiss only the selected message, which is this one, or to dismiss all, which is this one. This method of manually dismissing alerts makes sure you don't miss anything that got dismissed accidentally. Note that the notification center is built upon course table view. I can reorder the columns by dragging them to the desired location. I can also sort my data by clicking on the desired sort heading. So let's reverse the timestamps. I'm just double-clicking on the heading. We've found that the Notification Center can be so valuable in team environments that we've added the capability to make it your project home screen. It'll be the first thing you see when you log in, and I've done that. From the Tools menu, I open User Preferences. Then set the initial Explorer selection to the Notification Center. You also can set it to a package or a facility, but in this case I'm using the Notification Center. I'll click OK, and that change will take effect the next time that you open Core. Okay, time for some tips and best practices. Versioning and audit logging are often not appropriate at the beginning of your project. This is a time with a lot of change, and we suggest starting the project with versioning off, then turning it on when you're ready for your first baseline. Even if you are working alone on a project, I suggest that you create a username for yourself and do all work under that name. That way, should you ever share your data or import it into a server to work with others, you can attribute your work to yourself. Before purging versions, create a baseline. Also, before purging versions, creating baselines or purging audit logs, it's a good idea to back up your data. Simply export an XML file. And finally, be strategic about how you use the Notification Center. If you follow too much, you're likely to overlook important notifications. So be very careful about the choices that you make there. And if you find you're following something that you didn't want to, it's really easy to unfollow. You'll find it in the same menu right next to the follow option. You'll find a stop following option. Okay, Eva, that wraps up my prepared information today. I'm sure you have a question or two for me.
I do. I've got a few really good ones for you. Let's see. Our first one is from Brian. He wants to know, when baselining, does it change the date on the elements?
Good question, and the answer is no. When we're creating a baseline, it's just saying the current version is the only version and getting rid of every version before. And because it's not really changing the version, the date does not change.
Okay, short and sweet. Our next one is from Alex. He says, what if when using the project compare report that I don't want to look at all attributes?
If you don't want to look at all attributes. You know, the project compare report does by default show you all attributes. Can it be changed? Well, sure. It's not through that simple little interface where I have dialogues that ask me to choose. If you are proficient in Course Script, you could certainly get in there and make your own custom version of the project compare report to only look at certain things. Now, if you're a power user and you're going to run this report regularly, I would certainly recommend making your own custom version so it's exactly what you want to see. But again, that does require proficiency in Course Script.
All right, thank you. I have another one from Brian. Can the information from a project comparison report be exported as a project change XML project file that could be imported into another project? And he gives an example. We have another team working a separate database and want to provide periodic database updates to them.
Okay, Brian, I can get you the information you're asking for. It's not in a report format. Let me hop back out to Core and show you something really quick and show you where you find the nuts and bolts on how to do this. I'm going to go to Help Contents here, and there is an option here for collaborating with Core. Brian, you're going to want to read this, okay? Because this is the steps on how to use core in a collaborative environment that is not a core server. Okay, so if you've got somebody at another work site, this shows how to set a baseline, import it, export change files, and then go back and remake the master. Okay, and this is a great way to get those change files back and forth. It requires discipline, but hey, we're systems engineers. We understand systems, and so here is a quick little model of the system for that database exchange. So Brian, you'll definitely want to check this out. There's information on planning the update cycle, importing change files, everything you need to know.
All right, he said thank you.
You're welcome, Brian.
Up next, I have one from Samantha. She says, what happens if users are editing the same element at the same time? Is there a notification at the time, and how does it look on the audit? Okay.
Samantha, if two users commit at exactly the same time, it's just likely never to happen, quite honestly. Even if I was sitting with two computers and tried to commit changes together, they wouldn't commit together. I'm human and not that accurate. So it's going to commit as two changes. If they're in the same second, say a little bit apart, but in the same second, it will show up with the same timestamp that it's the same second, but you're going to see that there are two changes because they did actually happen at different milliseconds, and it was going to show up with different usernames of each person that made it. So you're going to see each version just as you would if they were made a minute apart, if they're made half a second apart. Good question, Samantha.
Okay, I have one final question. Okay. This one is from Giselle. What happens to existing versions if I disable versioning in an existing project? What about audit logs?
Okay, good question, Giselle. They go away. If I have versioning enabled and I disable it, I'm going to see a dialog that warns me all your current versions are going to go away, and the only version that's going to be left is the one that is current. You get rid of all the other 10 or however many you have, and the current version is the only thing that's left. And the same thing with audit logs. Actually, I'm not sure if disabling audit logs, let me take a quick look and see if disabling an audit log does that. Apologize, I don't know the answer to that right off the bat, but it is so easy to find out. We had to go to Tools, Administrative Tools, and we currently have audit logging off. So let's turn it on. And it says it will begin logging changes. So now we have it on. Let's turn it off and see what it alerts me to. Disable audit logging. This will discard all existing audit logs. So it's telling me right there in the dialog the answer to that. It will discard all audit logs, just as versions get discarded as well.
Okay, well, looks like that wraps up the Q&A for today. Bethany, thank you so much for an excellent presentation. That was very, very interesting.
My pleasure.
So I guess I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. And I want to invite you to join us again next week for a presentation titled Exploring DODAF and Other Architecture Frameworks, which is being presented by Ron Kratzky. Let me chat out that link to you now. Let me find it and copy it. Okay, there you go. And if you have any other questions or comments for Bethany that you didn't get a chance to send in today, don't hesitate to shoot her an email. I believe her email, her contact info is on your screen now. Or you can post your questions in the forum of our community site at community.vitechcorp.com. And I will also chat that out to you. And as I mentioned earlier, a recording of the webinar will be posted in the resources section of the Vitech website by the close of business tomorrow. So that wraps it up for today. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
The organizer has ended the session and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.